But
You get asked that all the time, I bet, don't you, in interviews?
I've never been asked that before, but we do have competitions. We don't deal in term papers within the institute. We deal in presentations. We've discovered it's easier to teach someone how to make a bullet briefing, a 5-minute briefing in PowerPoint, than it is to write print paper. And so what they do is we have 5, 15, and 45-minute packages depending on what the assignments are. But the point is, we have a contest going on right now that for the best bullet briefing on the Issachar track. We have our big annual meeting every October 25th. The top 3 briefings are going to win prizes. Some of them are going to win a trip to Israel as part of the thing. So we have those kinds of things. The prizes get sponsored by donors.
Wow.
But there is a lot of high-spirited fun, and some of it's competitive, but not in the physical sports sense.
Well, I would suggest if you could make a conference, you could put Back to the Bible and maybe open windows in there. And I'd put money on Koinonia House if you did.
Yeah.
It'd be very interesting to know what's your technical background, your science background, how that influences your approach to the Bible. Because
I was interested. Well, I was when I was even in high school. I had an interest in physics way back. I belonged to the Astronomical Society, the Los Angeles Astronomical Society up in Griffith Park. You build your own telescope, grind your own mirrors, that sort. And also I was just when at Friday evenings our idea of an outlet was to go over to Caltech and sit in the Friday evening lectures. So I was interested in physics way back, but I have master's degrees in engineering and business from UCLA. I've also done graduate math work at Denver and University of Colorado when I was in the Air Force. But I ended up getting my doctorate from Louisiana Baptist University. But I've just always had a fairly broad-based interest in the frontiers of science, and that tends, of course, to embroider some of my interests as we get it. Our book, our Genesis, we have a Genesis commentary. We spend a full hour session on each day of creation, and that Genesis commentary is it's multimedia, of course, but it is, I understand, it's being circulated in the government laboratories. So we tend to deal with some of these issues from a technical perspective. For example, most of us today, I think, realize that we don't live in 3 dimensions; we live in 4, 3 spatial dimensions. And time, right? Well, in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 18, that's exactly what Paul says. He lists the 4 dimensions. Right. And you miss that if you just read it, but if you're sensitive to the current perceptions of particle physics, you know that we have 4 spatial dimensions and there's 6 other dimensions that are only inferable by indirect means. In fact, on the 10th of September, they're going to throw the big switch on the Large Hadron Collider, and try to they're hopeful of maybe even discovering more about our basic reality here. So anyway, the point is some of these things, the more you know about real advanced science, and the more you know about your Bible, the more you see them converging. I'm not talking about speculations in science. So much of what masquerades as science are really conjectures built upon conjectures. And but if you're talking true empirically based science, the more you know about it, in fact, Nachmanides, who was a Hebrew sage in the 13th century, published in the 13th century, he concluded from a study of Genesis that the universe has 10 dimensions, only 4 are knowable and 6 are not knowable.
Right.
Now, he did that from geometrical considerations, I believe. But anyway, what makes it so interesting to me is the current thinking of the particle physicists is that we live in 10 dimensions. 4 are directly measurable. 6 of them are curled in less than 10 to the minus 35 centimeters, and therefore are inferable only by indirect means. So I find that fascinating because we're spending millions of dollars on atomic accelerator, a nuclear, particle accelerators, to discover what Nachmanides did. His homework in the Genesis text.
Well, I want to mention to our listeners whose heads may be spinning right now, who are not familiar with you, that this is the kind of thinking that goes on with your materials, where you have cutting-edge, very intelligent discussions that are up to date on what's going on in the world, but you apply it from a strong biblical foundation. And I find you to be so unique in that aspect in what you do. And the reason why I brought up your technical background, I think it actually influences the way one would even approach the Bible. And maybe that's why it clicks with me. My PhD is in mechanical engineering, so I come from that direction. I was a leader at the Air Force Research Labs for 16 years in developing aviation technologies, safety and survivability, and so it creates a certain approach. And we have a lot of people talking about doctrinal prophecy issues on our show that come from a technical background. And I find that's something whose time has come, and I try to encourage that more. What you were talking about what you're seeing going on in the world, and I want you to elaborate that in a little bit more detail right now. When you talk about the opportunity we have right now, I'm assuming you're going to tell us, from what I know of you, that the opportunity may be short-lived. And while it's a wonderful opportunity, the door may open and close, much like in Russia, where we had a window of a few years to get in and establish churches and to help build up the church. Mm-hmm. And then Putin comes in and starts shutting a lot of that down. And we see windows open and then windows close. And the access to technology like the Internet may be short-lived for all of us, not just Christians, but other people as well, with the Internet too and things like that are coming up. And that's what we try to do here, is to try to get information out while it's available. I know in the end of the book of Daniel, it talks about in the last days how knowledge will greatly increase and people going to and fro. And I wonder if, in fact, what we're talking about is a fulfillment of that. But the question is the short-lived nature of it. So if you can comment on that, and also about what else you see going on in world events that you think they're going to be coming together in the upcoming years, and how that's going to impact the church in the West and our daily operations and mission.
That's a pretty diversified
very light question.
You've got
very light question.
In 60 seconds or less.
Yeah. And we're timing you, yes.
Well, I think that, I guess the first thing, it's interesting to discover that the queen of the sciences, the really leading edge technology in all the sciences, turns out to be the information sciences. If you're in biology, the big frontier, of course, is the whole DNA code and all of that. That's the frontier is the information. If you're in the physics, of course, it's the same thing. It's interesting that in each general field of science, the cutting edge is what you technically would label as the information sciences. And that's one thing that fascinates me about the Bible, because the whole Scripture, the more you know about the information sciences, the more fascinating the whole Scripture becomes. You know, you hear a lot of these characters get involved with the equidistant letter sequences, the ELSs. Right. Well, you discover now that not only are there ELSs in the Bible, we also discover that's the secret to the DNA. In the RNA transforms, they have the introns and the extrons, and they edit it to get the proteins they want. Well, some of the same things going on in the biblical text, strangely enough. So, I guess what's interesting as you get into some of these areas is you discover that the DNA is an example. It's a 3 out of 4 error-correcting digital code. Now, there's not probably one engineer in 1,000 that can design a error-correcting code. You can design error detection codes where we have parity bits or whatever to discover there may be an error in a transmission. But designing an error-correcting code is tricky. If you use 11 bits per byte rather than 8, you can make it error-correcting. And there are machines in the intelligence community that run that way. The point is, we discover that the DNA is designed that way. It's a 3 out of 4 error-correcting code. And there's another thing. I'm just sort of prattling here, but I think it'll touch where you're going here. When I was in the Rand Corporation, back in 1955, the Rand Corporation published a book that was a milestone of its time called A Million Random Digits. If you pick that, I have one here. If you pick this up and you open it up, it's just random numbers. The whole book, and the average person would say, "Well, that's stupid. It's a book of random numbers." No, it was considered a breakthrough at the time. Why? Because they used the best computers to make sure that there was no periodicity, no symmetry, no predictability of any of the numbers, that they were truly random. And that turned out to be, that invoked the leading edge of our understanding of mathematics to accomplish that. And so that book turns out to be a useful device for people who are in laboratories that have, for some reason, a need for a sequence of random numbers. It turns out you can't do that in a computer. The best you can do is to generate what they call a pseudo-random number, a stream of numbers that approximate the properties of randomness. But they're never perfect because they come from an algorithm, which is a self-defeating idea. The point that I'm getting at is this: that book was meaningful because they were able to demonstrate total absence of design There was no patterning, no symmetry, no periodicity, you name it. Now that what I'm getting across is what's clear to anyone that understands information science, randomness is the opposite of design. Now, once you understand that, you watch today's rhetoric and you stand back astonished that that they're trying to attribute the most elegant designs we've ever encountered to the operation of randomness.
See, I thought you were alluding to our show, because many of our listeners have called it random electrons going out. They also use the term noise for it.
Yeah.
But
it just astonishes me that in our schools, that we insist that our kids get taught that we are the results of just randomness, and that it so violates logic, so violates empirical demonstration. It's interesting that we're forcing ignorance on our culture, and then we wonder why you have Columbine High School, why you have these bizarre outbreaks, because we teach them they have no destiny, etc. Anyway. I'm prattling here a little bit. Getting back to the technology, though, it's interesting that as you look at there are people who have written papers about communication of extraterrestrial intelligence, and they've even defined the requirements for a language for extraterrestrial. And as you explore that, you discover there is a language on the planet Earth that meets the requirements. There's only one that does. It happens to be Hebrew, because it is self-parsing. There are 5 of the 22 letters. There's 5 that have a different form if it's the last letter of a word, so it turns out to be self-parsing. But more to the point, every letter, most alphabets are phonetic, whether it's the Cyrillic alphabet, our Latin, whatever. The Hebrew alphabet isn't just phonetic; it's conceptual. They're semenes, not phonemes. Every Hebrew word has at its root 3 letters. If you know the meaning of the 3 letters, and they each have definable meanings themselves, if you combine those, if you know the meaning of the letters, you read the word, you not only know how to pronounce it, you know what it means. Let me give you an example. The first letter is the Aleph, which originally looked like a longhorn steer. It was before we get our A. So we have the Aleph, the first letter in the Hebrew. And it is first, or also like an ox, represents strength. Okay, good, no problem. The second letter looks like a little horizontal line with a teepee on it. It's the Bet, or what later becomes a B, if you will, in the Phoenician letters and so on. The Bet, of course, means house. Okay, well, if you take an Aleph and a Bet together, that's the leader of the house. No problem. If you take a Hey, which is the breath, the Hey, like Henry Higgins did with Liza Doolittle, if you take the breath, the Hey, which represents the essence or the spirit, whatever, the ruach, if you will, and you put that in the middle of a word, it represents the essence of whatever the word would mean otherwise. So if you take the A and the B, that's Ab, that means father, you put the Hey in the middle of it, you have the essence of the Father, and that turns out to be their word for love, because love is the essence of the Father. You suddenly begin to realize that the letters are not just phonetic, they're conceptual. And you also discover that the numerical value of the letters starts to carry meaning. The word for pregnancy adds up to 271, which is the length of pregnancy.
Right.
You take the word for year, it adds up to 355, because they're in a lunar year, and on it goes. So the point is that as you start to study the Hebrew alphabet, the more you know about information science, the more stunning it becomes, because it's also been designed for encryption. All the vowels, it has no vowels, they're all consonants. The vowels are inferred. And that's the first thing you do if you've been in cryptology. You try to get the redundancy out, because all codes get broken down because excessive redundancy, so you get rid of the redundancy. First thing you do is get rid of the vowels. And in Hebrew, it's already done for you. Right. And on it goes. We could go prattle on and on and on. But the point is, the more you know about the information sciences, then the more in fact, that leads to the basic discovery that is the foundation of our ministry, by the way. I didn't get to that earlier, and I probably should now. There are 2 discoveries that changed my life, discovered very early and have been reconfirmed all through my life. The first discovery is that these 66 books that we glibly call the Bible, these 66 books, even though they were penned by over 40 different guys over almost 2,000 years, we discover it's an integrated message. And I don't mean just thematically, that every detail in it is by deliberate design. And that's something you have to discover personally. Just telling you doesn't help. But once you discover that personally, it's stunning to realize that it's a design package. And once you discover that, you stumble into the second discovery, which is that the origin of that message had to come from outside our time domain. Why? Because it lays out history before it happens. And the ultimate history it lays out the origin, the details, and the destiny of a person. In the Hebrew, they call him the Messiah. And we draw from the Greek and call him Christ.